Isabella Cassidy was 17 when her stepfather locked her out. It happened on a Tuesday morning in Portland, Maine, after she'd made the mistake of telling her mother's new husband that she knew about the bruises he left on her mother's arms. He'd responded by throwing her backpack out the front door and informing her that she had 15 minutes before he called the police. Her mother stood in the doorway, her face drawn and careful, and said nothing. Bella spent 3 weeks in the youth shelter in Portland, where she learned that most people were much worse off than she was, and that her education, 3 years of high school, a decent GPA, meant very little when she had nowhere to sleep. A caseworker named Patricia found an older relative in the system, a great-uncle she'd never met, who'd died 6 months earlier and left behind a property that no one had claimed. The deed had been sitting in a file for half a year, waiting for someone to inherit it. An obituary in a local newspaper, a property deed in a lawyer's office. And suddenly, Isabella Cassidy, 17 years old with everything she owned in a backpack, was the owner of a lighthouse on the Maine coast that she'd never seen. The lawyer who handled the paperwork spoke in the cautious tone of someone delivering bad news. "The property is located on Beacon Point," he explained, pushing a folder across his desk. "It's been unmaintained for approximately 15 years. The lighthouse itself is structurally unsound. There's a caretaker's cottage that's somewhat more stable. You'll likely want to consider selling the land. It's valuable beachfront property. A developer has already expressed interest." Bella took the deed and the keys and took a bus to Beacon Point, a small coastal town where the Atlantic felt like a living thing, cold and substantial and utterly indifferent. The property was situated on a rocky peninsula, accessible only by a gravel road that climbed steadily away from town. The lighthouse rose from a cluster of weathered buildings, like a pale finger pointing accusingly at the sky. The paint had peeled away from the tower's lower section, revealing bare wood beneath. The light room at the top was dark and empty. The caretaker's cottage beside it looked like it was slowly sinking into the earth, its roof sagging in places, its windows either boarded or broken. But it was hers. The deed said so. After weeks of sleeping in dormitory-style shelters where she shared space with the desperate and the displaced, it was an almost shocking experience to stand on property that legally belonged to her, to know that no one could lock her out, that she had the right to be here. She stayed in the cottage that first night, too afraid to try climbing the lighthouse stairs. The cottage had a working door lock, a bed with a stained mattress, a kitchen sink with water that ran rusty and then clear. She slept holding the deed like evidence. In the morning, she explored. The lighthouse base had a heavy wooden door with a lock she could open with the key on her ring. Inside was a spiral staircase and a space that had clearly been a storage room once. Metal shelves held oil cans and kerosene bottles, brushes caked with old paint, coils of rope. The air smelled like salt and rust and something else, something mineral and foreign. She began climbing the stairs. They were narrow and steep, and the tower seemed to sway slightly as she ascended, though she knew that was impossible. Halfway up, she noticed something odd. The stone walls of the lighthouse had small openings, not windows, but something else. Narrow slots, carefully positioned, almost like deliberate apertures. She stopped on a landing and looked closer. In the limited light filtering through the gaps, she could see that the slots ran down the interior walls in a specific pattern, organized like a grid. Below them, on the landing, was a thick layer of dust. But beneath the dust, she could see what looked like carved channels in the stone floor, almost like the grout lines of tiles, but deliberate, purposeful. She descended the stairs slowly, her hand running along the stone wall. The channel system continued all the way down. It was an acoustic architecture she was looking at. stone carved deliberately to project and amplify sound. But why would a lighthouse have such a system? In the basement level of the lighthouse, behind a locked iron door that took her 20 minutes to force open, she found the notebooks. Dozens of them, leather-bound and water-damaged, stacked on metal shelves. The writing inside was careful and meticulous, and the entries dated back 43 years. The author identified himself only as J.W. But the handwriting and the obsession were unmistakable. This was work done by someone devoted beyond reason, someone who'd sacrificed everything for a project that most people would have called madness. The first entries were laboratory observations, sound frequencies, harmonic resonance, measurement of how different materials absorbed and reflected different pitches, sketches of ear anatomy, detailed and precise. The author was studying something about how sound moved through air and through solid matter. But the entries evolved. The research became more specific. The author was studying the effect of specific frequencies on biological systems, neural tissue specifically. The notebooks contained references to papers on neuroplasticity, to research on acoustic therapy, to theories about how sound could be used to repair damage to the nervous system. By the middle of the notebooks, J.W.'s work had become focused and urgent. The frequency cascade pattern shows promise. Subjects exposed to the phase-modulated acoustic field showed measurable improvement in synaptic reconnection. If I can document the full mechanism, if I can understand how the acoustic resonance affects calcium channel modulation, this could help. This could actually help people who've been told their condition is permanent. Bella sat in the basement of her inherited lighthouse and read entry after entry describing decades of acoustic research, of sound engineering, of a man who devoted his life to understanding whether sound could heal. And then, in a notebook dated 15 years ago, she found the letter. I'm running out of time. My hands shake now. The Parkinson's makes precision difficult. But I've documented everything. The acoustic frequency cascade that produces therapeutic resonance, the architectural specifications for creating the necessary resonance chamber, the biological mechanisms, all of it. This knowledge can't die with me. I chose the lighthouse because it's already a structure designed for broadcasting. The sound projection systems I've built into the walls are sophisticated, but they're only extensions of the lighthouse's natural acoustic properties. I've created a space where sound can be used for healing, and I've built in enough redundancy that the system will function long after I'm gone. This could matter. This could help people whose doctors have told them there's no hope. But I need someone to understand it. Someone with enough intelligence to understand the work and enough courage to protect it. I don't know if anyone will come. I only know that I've spent my life creating something that matters, and I can't let it die simply because I'm dying. Bella found out later, through records the lawyer's office located, that James Whitmore had died 15 years earlier, and that he'd spent the last decades of his life living in the lighthouse cottage, working in isolation, building the acoustic therapy system into the very structure of the lighthouse itself. He'd been a physicist before he got sick, before his own neurological condition had driven him to desperate research. He'd built a machine that was also a building. The entire lighthouse structure was designed to generate and project therapeutic acoustic frequencies. For 15 years, the lighthouse had stood empty, the system dormant, the knowledge locked inside notebooks that no one had thought to read. But now Bella was here, and she needed to understand what she'd inherited. She spent the first week reading through the notebooks, learning the basics of acoustic physics, understanding the system. The lighthouse was designed to generate specific frequency cascades that could help the body's own neurological repair mechanisms. People with paralysis, with permanent nerve damage, with conditions that conventional medicine said were irreversible. They might find help in the carefully designed acoustics of this lighthouse. But the knowledge was useless without someone willing to learn it, willing to maintain the system, willing to protect it from being dismantled or destroyed. When Dr. Raymond Ashford arrived 10 days later, he came in a black luxury sedan with 2 associates, all of them dressed for business despite the salt wind and rough terrain. "Miss Cassidy," Ashford said, extending a hand. "I represent coastal biotech industries. I understand you've recently inherited this property." Bella didn't shake his hand. "Yes. We've been aware of this location for some time," Ashford continued, unperturbed. "The previous owner, James Whitmore, conducted some interesting acoustic research. The property itself is structurally significant from a geological perspective. There are rare mineral deposits in the rock foundation. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer. $700,000 for the property and everything on it." $700,000. Bella's stepfather had thrown her out of a house worth maybe $300,000. $700,000 would be a life. It would be college, safety, distance from the place where she'd learned that the people who loved you could hurt you if you made them angry. "What do you want with the lighthouse?" she asked. "We're interested in the geological formations," Ashford said smoothly. "The acoustic properties of the stone. We're developing new technologies in the field of acoustic engineering, and the unique mineral composition of this site would be valuable for research purposes. The building itself is historically interesting but not particularly significant. We'd likely demolish it to access the substrate." Demolish it. Dismantle the decades of work, destroy the system James Whitmore had built into the very structure of the lighthouse. Let the knowledge die so that companies could extract minerals from the rock beneath. "No," Bella said. "I don't think you understand the magnitude of what we're offering," Ashford began. "I understand perfectly," Bella interrupted. "You want to destroy something important so you can sell the rubble. I'm not interested." What followed was exactly what she should have expected. Legal letters arrived claiming the property violated coastal protection statutes. Building inspectors appeared and declared the lighthouse structurally unsound. Environmental agencies filed claims that the mineral deposits fell under federal protection. Ashford's company had lawyers and resources and the kind of patience that came from very large budgets. But Bella had something they didn't have. James Whitmore's complete notebooks, which contained not just acoustic research, but geological data, mineral surveys, environmental impact assessments that Whitmore had completed decades ago to prove that the lighthouse was stable and that the mineral composition posed no environmental threat. She also had Sarah Chen. Sarah was a documentary filmmaker who'd contacted Bella through a local historical society, having seen a brief mention of the lighthouse's history. She was fascinated by James Whitmore's work, impressed by what he'd tried to accomplish, and furious that a corporation was trying to destroy it. Sarah helped Bella understand the notebooks. She brought in consultants, a neurologist who confirmed that Whitmore's acoustic therapy theory was scientifically sound, an acoustician who verified that the lighthouse's design would actually work, an environmental consultant who reviewed Whitmore's data and confirmed the mineral deposits posed no threat. Together, Sarah and Bella compiled a comprehensive report documenting the scientific significance of Whitmore's work, the potential therapeutic applications of acoustic frequency therapy, and the irreplaceable loss that would occur if the lighthouse was demolished. Sarah filmed interviews with people who had neurological conditions, people who would be helped if Whitmore's research could be properly developed. Bella submitted formal requests for historical landmark designation and environmental protection. By spring, the tide had turned. The Maine State Historical Commission granted the lighthouse protected status. An acoustic engineering firm expressed interest in Whitmore's research and offered to fund further development. A national disability rights organization highlighted the story, bringing media attention to the work James Whitmore had done in isolation. The potential for healing, for scientific advancement, for helping people who'd been told their conditions were permanent. It became impossible to ignore. Coastal Biotech withdrew their offer and moved on to other projects. Dr. Ashford's letters stopped. The legal pressure dissipated, replaced by the kind of attention that protected rather than threatened. Bella didn't sell the Lighthouse. Instead, she established it as a research facility, working with Sarah and the acoustic engineering firm to carefully document and restore Whitmore's system. She enrolled in college, studying acoustics and neurology. She spent summers at the Lighthouse, learning the systems Whitmore had built, understanding the frequencies, maintaining the delicate acoustic architecture that 40 years of obsessive work had created. On an autumn afternoon, standing on the gallery that circled the light room, Bella looked out at the Atlantic and understood something about inheritance. James Whitmore hadn't left her the Lighthouse because he'd known she was coming. He'd left it because he believed that somewhere, someone would eventually arrive who would value what he'd spent his life protecting. The universe had delivered that someone, and it had delivered her at exactly the moment when she needed to believe that something mattered, that effort meant something, that the work of dedicated people could survive beyond their own lives. The Lighthouse still stood, and the stone still hummed with frequencies calibrated 40 years ago by a physicist trying to heal the unhealable. The knowledge had not died. The system had not been dismantled. And somewhere, people with neurological conditions were beginning to understand that acoustic therapy might actually help them. Have you ever inherited something that taught you who you were meant to become?